quick mic check into the TVW microphones.
Mic check 1, mic check 2.
So we got a lot of your friends virtually, right?
Yeah.
Jamie, how's it working here? Is that working for everybody in British Columbia?
Pretty much. Jim Mumford will moderate when we get
All right.
to your Q&A portion.
And we have Jerry Cornfield, the Everett Herald,
Okay.
the Everett Seagulls. Anybody else from our side of the border on, you know? Please.
Olympics on there. Are we ready to kick it off?
Yep.
Okay. Governor, yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We've just finished a really great discussion with Premier David Eby, beautiful British Columbia. We had a great talk about some of the most pressing matters of the day, including the Oscars. And I showed my appreciation for the beautiful British Columbia flag, which I really think is beautiful, and about many things about British Columbia. We have had start of, I think, a beautiful friendship, continuing to build what we've done with the Premier's predecessor. I'll just start with issues of clean energy. Both our province and our state is moving forward to really build jobs in a clean energy economy, and I think we're both celebrating success on both sides of the border. We talked about ways that we could continue to collaborate, potentially collaboration around a mutual cap and invest system at some point, but obviously trying to find a way to grow jobs in both of our communities. We had good discussion about some of our joint housing and homelessness issues. Both of our communities have suffered homelessness, and both of our communities recognize the need for great investment. I was actually lauding British Columbia's efforts in housing that have made such a significant investment of $3 billion in U.S. currency in housing. Is one of the things we're working on right now. I told the Premier about our efforts for Washington State to join British Columbia in that type of investment program. We talked about some gun violence issue. We met some people who are actually the Moms Demand Action on Gun Violence. We happened to run into them in the corridor, and they were expressing thanks to British Columbia of their leaderships that have shown that it has been effective in reducing gun violence. And so we intend to join British Columbia this year with some additional gun safety measures. We talked about high-speed rail, about our interest in advancing high-speed rail over time. We recognize the tremendous economic and cultural benefit of that, and the importance of us moving forward now, in part because our federal government has such huge billions of dollars available for investment, and we'll be looking for ways to work together in that. We also talked about our Nooksack flooding problem that is a challenge on both sides of the border, and we're looking forward to really setting up our working group so we can get to work thinking about potential options there. So we covered a lot, and we should, because we have such great intertwined futures of our people. So welcome, Mr. Premier. Enjoyed working with you so far. It's a great start.
Thank you, Governor, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by recognizing the territory of the Coast Salish people here in Washington State, the Nisqually and the Squaxin Island First Nations. It's great to be here in Washington State, and it's been a really wonderful visit with so many remarkable people. I bring greetings from British Columbia, that is the province to the north geographically and to the south of the NHL standings. I do recognize that. We had a really nice and really productive day, and there's so many common priorities, common issues and challenges that our two jurisdictions face. Which is why we're talking about things like the clean energy economy and the opportunities to work together to build that up in our region. The ability to connect our people with high-speed rail and to deepen those connections. Salmon, an iconic species for Washington State and for British Columbia. The issues of affordable and attainable housing, just to grow our economy, that essential infrastructure that we need. And we talked about social issues as well. We talked about those mental health and addiction issues, the scourge of fentanyl, and the work that we have to do on that. This morning, I had the opportunity to meet with Governor Gregoire from Challenge Seattle. It was a great discussion with business leaders from the Seattle area, from Washington State. We talked about the Cascadia Innovation Corridor and the opportunities that are there, and the opportunities for BC businesses in Washington State, and a really great roundtable with Washington business and clean tech companies, where we talked about our strengths in BC and their interests in partnering with British Columbia on a number of different initiatives. And my message with Governor Inslee, with the businesses and others, BC is when it comes to new and clean economy, BC's open for business and open and keen on partnership. Through partnership and working together, we can overcome these big challenges like climate change and make everybody see the positive impact of a clean economy on both our province and your beautiful state. We share so much more than just a border. We have personal and family ties that go back generations. In fact, I see the Evies were on Whidbey Island, and not necessarily direct descendants of mine, but lots of family ties across the border. We also share that culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, and to the beauty of the planet and a determination to protect it for our kids and grandkids. And those sort of cultural and family ties give us so many advantages here in the Pacific Northwest before we even talk about the resources that are available to us. The Nooksack River flooding issue that we discussed is one that calls on our ingenuity to address and calls on urgent action. And Governor Inslee and I pledged to redouble our efforts in that area to move that project forward to protect our people on both sides of the border. We have a history of working together. I know the Skagit Donut Hole project, where we worked together to surrender some mineral tenures there to ensure the preservation and protection of that watershed, which is important on both sides of the border. The impact of climate change in Washington State is as visible as it is in British Columbia, wildfires, flooding, and I think that leads to the need for us to, the urgency in the populations that both of us serve, to take action on that. It's great to see the initiatives that have been taken here in Washington State around a hydrogen hub. And we had the opportunity to talk about the hydrogen cluster in British Columbia and how we can really make hydrogen a cornerstone of climate response in the northwest of the United States and in British Columbia, working together. We believe strongly that everything from our mining sector to our hydrogen technologies and our clean hydroelectricity can really assist Governor Inslee and Washington State in delivering on some of your goals and to the benefit of our businesses as well. I know, as Governor Inslee does, that people who say we have to choose between our economy and our climate, it's a false choice. Governor Inslee, your work here in Washington State is a demonstration of that, and we believe our work in British Columbia with our strong recovery out of the pandemic is also evidence of this approach. And this is a message I'll be repeating. We're doing trade missions. This is certainly one of them. It made sense to me that my first international visit as Premier was to our neighbor in Washington State to build trade. But we'll be continuing that trade work in Asia, promoting BC business and promoting that vision for our regional economy that we have that will benefit British Columbians and also our friends here in Washington State. The partnership that we have with First Nations and the relationship with First Nations people also mirrored on both sides of the border, and I know when we take strong action on old growth forests, when we address fossil fuel subsidies, when we make forestry more sustainable, we have good partners here and supporters here, and that shared values, border, and integrated economy will benefit all of us. We know that we're stronger together. We know that by working together we can take on these big challenges, and I agree with you. This is a great start to our relationship, and certainly a great introduction to me as new Premier to the leadership here in Washington State, and just so inspiring what you've been up to here, and also the opportunity for us to work together to build both of our great jurisdictions, and I look forward to that. Thank you, Governor Inslee.
Thank you. One thing I mentioned, you mentioned our personal ties. I should mention in full disclosure that my first grandchild, Brody Inslee, his internet handle is Canada Craver. He is your #1 fan south of the border, just so you know that.
Well, it's nice to have an inside guy.
You
That's,
got he's working for you
That's
all,
very
and he
good
says,
news.
why can't you be more like that premier they've got up there in British Columbia? He tells me that all the time. So
All right, well, I hope that someday he'll say that about me.
we're happy to stand for easy questions. Shall we start in British Columbia? Jamie, or,
Let's start with Jerry.
okay, well, we'll start with Jerry, I guess.
Thank you. Premier, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your housing affordability initiative. Looking at a quick update, it looks like you're looking to increase density, allow 3 units for a single family, and very similar with the governor and Democrats have been talking about in Washington. I'm interested in knowing, what have you learned so far? What are the hurdles what advice could you give Washington lawmakers or take away from what's happening here in Washington?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. Washington and BC share some very common challenges here. So we have remarkable population growth in British Columbia. We had 100,000 people. It was a 60-year record, actually, of the number of people moving to our province last year, and we broke those records in the first 2 quarters of this year. Huge demand for housing coming from that. I understand through economic success here in Washington State, lots of people choosing to move here, and similar need for housing. The challenges we have in BC have been around the ability to get that housing built in a timely way to respond to the demand. The provincial initiatives focus on our permitting processes around new housing developments where the province touches those permitting processes. We're putting additional resources in to work through the backlog that we have, but also to make a faster permitting process. We have new legislation passed where we will be working with cities to set housing targets that match our population growth, including specific types of housing that cities are going to need to hit. And there are incentives encouraging them in that direction. We have a growing communities fund that we just announced, but there are also consequences if they don't hit those targets that we set together, which is that the province will come in and do necessary zoning to get that housing built and necessary approvals to get that housing built. We just passed that legislation last session. Looking forward, we're working with cities around addressing the ability of putting more than one unit on single-family home sites, as well as other initiatives around expediting the approval of housing at the municipal level. We have a significant cooperation and coordination improvements that are available to us at the provincial level that we hope will be able to expedite the construction of the housing that we need. Having housing sitting on someone's desk for 2 or 3 years doesn't benefit anyone. Costs go up in that time period. We need the housing now. And we're also providing support for essential infrastructure for cities, water treatment plants, parks, trails, arenas, community centers, recognizing that with growth comes demand on that infrastructure and supporting cities, municipal leaders in being able to deliver that as well. We have as well demand measures. We have a speculation and vacancy tax. When you have a property that's left vacant in a speculation vacancy tax area, you pay a higher property tax to the provincial government. That money is then turned back to housing. We have a foreign buyers tax, which places a higher property tax on people buying from outside British Columbia. We recently changed our strata rules. We had a number of stratas that did not permit rentals in those condo buildings. And we've made it legal for anyone to rent their unit, because we do have a tax if you leave your unit vacant, so it felt unfair at a minimum for someone that was getting taxed for leaving it vacant but wasn't allowed to rent it out. But the actual issue was about the fact that we had a condo sitting vacant where someone wanted to rent it and someone was desperate to rent it, looking through Craigslist for a place to rent. So we have both supply and demand initiatives. We recognize that both are important, and so we've taken steps on all of those measures.
If I may, let me express, I think there are 2 great similarities of Washington and British Columbia and one major difference. The great similarity is the source, the fundamental source of the problem, and that is we haven't built enough housing. And this is true up and down the West Coast. It's California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia. All have the same phenomena, which is we are extremely attractive places to live. We have had hundreds of thousands of people moving into our provinces and states, and we have not been able to build housing enough to house these people. That is the fundamental problem. And so we have to build more housing. That's the similarity. And it's because of our incredibly successful economic growth, much of which is around clean energy, you talked about. The clean energy jobs we're creating are part of this economic spectacular success story. But the downside is a lack of housing. The second thing is we are moving, as British Columbia has in many of the similar ways, to increase the stock of housing, to remove barriers to housing, including changing in our zoning rules to allow much more housing, of denser housing, in particularly our urban areas. I'm confident we're going to have significant progress this year in the legislature on that score. We're also increasing the pace of permitting to allow local communities to permit things much faster so we don't have people sitting on a permit for 2 years before you can build a home. So we have those significant similarities. But there is a significant difference is that British Columbia is already green-lit about $3 billion in American dollars of investment, public investment in housing to actually build housing that the private markets have not been able to service. We have not yet done that, and I am very hopeful, and we talked about this, that our legislature will match and perhaps exceed British Columbia. I've called on our legislature to authorize $4 billion of public investment so we can go out and finance the building that the private market will not finance, even though we accelerate permitting and changing our zoning rules. So that's one place we intend to catch British Columbia. We've certainly at least caught them in ice hockey. Now we need to catch them in financing housing, and I hope we can get that done this year.
Okay, we're now ready to take questions from reporters online. Again, I'll call on individual reporters. If you'd like to ask a question, please post your name and media out in the chat. And I'm going to start with Richard Zussman. Richard, I will go ahead and make your microphone available, and then you can unmute yourself. And that should be available now, Richard.
Perfect. Just want to make sure as well, is it one question or follow-up?
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Governor, appreciate that. I'm going to say that's a thumbs up for the follow-ups.
You bet, you bet, you bet.
And it's on the question Jerry just asked about as well, about housing affordability. Premier, we're hearing another case of a woman on the island here whose home has gone 55 plus to avoid having to rent out suites. She's 30, hoping to start a family and potentially have a partner move in. What do you say, is there any thought being given by the province to close that loophole and not allow stratas to move to the 55 plus category if they're currently not within that seniors rental zone?
So I had the opportunity to reach out to the family that was initially profiled and identified this issue for us. And to express a commitment to them as well as to British Columbians that they will not be, under my watch anyway, kicked out of their homes through an effort like this by their strata. We want people to start families. We want them to build their families in British Columbia. This legislation is about making housing available for people to do that. So we're currently doing the policy work. We will be introducing amendments to address this issue of people who live in buildings that then convert to 55 plus. I'll also note that we are in a situation in our province where we are particularly in need of housing for seniors looking for a place to rent. And so a building being 55 plus in itself is not objectionable. What is objectionable is empty units in that building or people being kicked out of their homes because their strata decides to move in this direction. So we're going to be taking on that important issue. There's a provision that has existed for a long time in strata law in British Columbia, but obviously we do see some buildings making some unfortunate choices in terms of how they treat their current residents, and we'll move to address that issue.
And I believe we have time for just one more question we'll go to Katie DeRosa.
He wanted a follow-up, I think he said. Yeah.
Careful, Jay, there's going to be 2 questions in this follow-up if I know Richard Zussman. Yeah.
You know what, ironically, I was actually going to do it to help out Katie because she worried she wasn't going to get her question. So I'm actually happy to ask it technically on your end. So this is the question from my colleague Katie. Is BC at risk of missing out on an investment from clean tech companies as it competes with the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act? This is from both the Governor and the Premier, especially in light of Parkland announcing it's scrapping its renewable diesel project in Burnaby.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's a couple of pieces that I shared with the Governor about the Inflation Reduction Act. First of all, I think for everybody that is concerned about climate, and I would say that's the vast majority of British Columbians, we are thrilled to see the United States stepping up to address this issue and to put climate at the center of a key industrial policy for their country. It does bring a challenge to British Columbia, and it requires us to be better. And it has been a key part of my communications to the federal government and the federal finance minister of the need for Canada to be very cognizant of what the United States is doing and to look at ways that we can remain competitive and expand our competitive advantage in relation to the clean energy field. We're looking very carefully to the federal budget coming up at the end of the month because we believe that British Columbians bring a lot to the table around clean energy. And with a strong federal partner with some incentives in place at the provincial level, our work will make a formidable competitor for American business around clean energy. But we do need that cooperation between the federal government and the provincial government. We need jobs for British Columbians in this sector. We believe we bring a lot of advantages to the table. And the benefit of what the Americans are doing in terms of our relationship with Washington State is, because we're so closely tied, because there's such a shared understanding about where we need to go, investment that comes to Washington State through the IRA will help British Columbia as well. If we have that strong federal partner in Canada, it will benefit not just British Columbians, but also residents of Washington State as we show leadership up and down the Cascadia corridor. And that's exactly what today's meeting is about, is building that up so that we all benefit through these initiatives.
Yeah, what I would say is, given the enormous revolution, which is the decarbonization of the entire world economy, there's enough work for everybody here. And I think over time, we're going to find that out with very, very rapid job creation on both sides of this border. I'm very confident of that. And what we have, I hope, in our future is some joint approach on a cap and invest system, which will create capital that can be used on both sides of the border to create jobs. And we talked about a potential joining the California and Quebec markets. I think that's a reasonable possibility for us. And when we do that, it's going to create jobs on both sides of the border. So I think we're going to have nothing but an alliance as we move forward. By the way, hats off to the Premier here, who had a citizen who had one challenge, and the Premier picked up the phone and called him and got this solved on this strata issue. That is really hands-on service. Congratulations. I'm going to have to be as busy as you are, I see. That's pretty amazing.
Katie DeRosa, I just wanted to double check that was your question and to ask you a follow-up. And your mic is available if you'd like to unmute.
Yes, thank you so much to Richard for making sure I get my question in, and happy to ask more specifically, Premier Eby, can you weigh in on the decision by Parkland to not expand its renewable diesel project in Burnaby, which could be a loss of $600 million investment, could have created thousands of jobs. So is that an example of one company moving its operations to the U.S.?
Yeah, I think the decision by Parkland underlines the urgency that we believe the federal government needs to look at how we can ensure we are competitive federally with initiatives undertaken in the United States. For our part, at the provincial level, we see both the opportunity and the challenge ahead around establishing a clean energy economy and ecosystem in British Columbia. We think we have a lot of advantages to bring to the table, as well as a number of initiatives to support that kind of business. But we will need that strong federal partner, and looking at that Parkland decision, it's a good opportunity to remind the federal government about what's at stake.
Thank you, everybody. That concludes our Q&A.
Thank you very much. See you at the next hockey game.
Okay, thanks very much, Jake.
Thank you.